Hello and welcome back to another episode of Oasys Top Tips. Did you know that Oasys Reporter lets you extract max and min contour values from D3PLOT models, storing them as variables, which can be used to automate reporting analysis results? So I was inspired to do this top tip because I was recently asked how this can be done, and I thought what a perfect opportunity to show people. So I've got a reporter template open and I've made a table here with various values that need to be populated, and I'm going to show you how those can be populated in this top tip. So when you've got reporter open, you'll need to make sure you have a linked D3plot session. You can either click on the D3plot button at the top here, or alternatively, you could work the other way around, and from D3plot, you could click on the reporter button, and that opens up a linked session. Now, a quick tip is that you can tell we have a link session because we can see the reporter logo here and the ability to capture an image to the reporter session. The reload and resize buttons are grayed out, and that's because we don't currently have any items selected in reporter, but it's quite common that we either want to reload something that's already been captured or overwrite a placeholder item from a existing template. So if we click on reporter, we can see that we can add a new item here. But what we actually want to do is add some variables and export them to reporter. So if we click on the Show Variables button here, a pop-up will appear and it tells us that in order to export some variables, we need to be plotting some data with max and min contouring on. We have plastic strain already shown here. So if I just contour that data, we can see that that now changes to a plus, and we have the ability to add a variable. By default, we've got the plastic strain and the max is added. And then we also have the option to select the entity ID and entity type, which I'm going to do. And then we're also going to click it again and add the minimum as well. Now we could change the variable names, and this is the name that is exported into reporter, as well as the description, but I'm going to leave it like that for now. I'm going to click on these types as well. At the moment, we can see the plastic strain isn't very interesting. So if we redock this, we'll see that we get back to our minimized view, and we can see the entire car model here, and it's not very interesting because there's no plastic strain at the beginning of the analysis. If we jump right to the end of the analysis, we then have some plastic strain, and we can see, if we blank off a few parts, that we have something going on here with the radiator, and that's probably the main kind of culprit for the big plastic strains we're seeing. But we're going to unblank everything and just output the plastic strain for the entire model to start with. So we click on Show Variables again, that opens up here, and then all we want to do is click on Capture, and then go back to Reporter, and notice that has created an image, and we didn't really need the image, so we'll just double click on that and change it to blank, and that means that an image isn't going to be created, but we still capture that data. And that's because the data is essentially presented as contoured data on the model, but in this particular instance, we just want the outputs, the single max and min outputs. Now, if we look at the variables here, we can edit them, and we can see we have these new variables created for the max and min, as well as the entity ID and entity type. So I'm going to double click on the table, and then a quick tip, Control I, gives you the option to insert things from the variable list. So I want to get the maximum entity ID, which is just that one there. And then here is the maximum value, Control I again. And we're going to have the maximum strain for model 1. And then here we're going to have the minimum, which isn't very interesting, it's just 0. OK, and then press P to go into presenter mode. And we can see that we've got those variables out, which is really nice, but the formatting of them looks a bit distracting and not easy to read. So we can just simply go to the variables and then select the variables we want to edit. So here, edit that, and then we'll give it a type, floating point number with 2 decimal places, and we're going to do the same for the minimum. Floating point number with 2 decimal places. Okay, great. So our maximum plastic strain was 2.02, and the minimum was 0, unsurprising. So let's come back to D3plot now, and we can see that because we've already captured that item, it's now here, and it's added a new item. If we select on the item we've already generated, then instead of saying capture, it now says update, And we might need to do that if we change some of the values. So maybe we're changing the state to be a different state, in which case the plastic strain differs. Or what I'm going to do now is change the integration points, because I was using the middle surface, but I actually want to use the mag all. And when I do that, the plastic strain changes a little bit, increases to 2.338. And so if I click on update now and come back to reporter, we can now see it's gone to 2.34. So it's rounded up to the second decimal place. Great. So that was capturing it for the entire model. Now let's do something very similar, but just for a part of the model. So we'll go back to D3PLOT, and I'm going to close this down for a second, and then I'm going to change the view. I find it quite helpful to change the first contour to grey, just because it's quite different to other things in this context where we're looking at just 0. And then we can also change it to the shaded view if we wanted with F. It makes it a bit easier to see. So we can see that radiator is dominating things, but what I want to do is just pick out the bumper here. So go only on the bumper, and we can see that progressing, crumpling through the analysis. And so we might be interested in then taking the plastic strain at the end of the analysis. So let's change that view here, just so we can see it all. Bring up the reporter tab again, and we do want to add a new item here. And in this case, it's going to be item 4. So I'm actually just going to say, instead of item 4, I'm going to say bumper. I'm going to change that again here. Bumper M1 plastic strain. And we won't need the entity. We don't really need these other bits, so I'm only going to select that one because the minimum is going to be 0, so doesn't really matter what entity it picks out. And then I'll just capture that again, come back to reporter, and we've got that here. Press P and change that image to say blank. Now the image is not going to be output. We'll minimize that again. Doesn't really matter the size of it because there's no image being created. And then we'll come and we'll insert the items here. Control I, and we can input the bumper entity ID there. And then Control I, and we've got the maximum and the minimum here. Okay, so now when I press P, we can see that that's output, and again the formatting needs to be done. Okay, so if I just edit that now in here, what I can do is I can add a special characters before the percentage symbol to F, and that just means 2 floating points, and then again 2F, so we're going to get 2 decimal places out there, and then I go back to presenter mode, and we can see that now that's formatted. And the benefit of that is that it's saved in the string, so the formatting will override whatever formatting we had in here. So in this context, we've set that one to floating point to precision 2, floating point to precision 2, but in this context, we didn't need to set it because we've overridden it. Okay, now finally I'm going to plot the von Mises stress for the bumper. So back to D3PLOT again. So we now want to plot the von Mises stress, not the plastic strain. So what we could do is we could change it by changing the category and do stress and von Mises, or we can actually change it using the different scalar which I've set up already. So I'm going to deactivate the first scalar and then activate the second scalar, and that now changes to the von Mises stress. I'm going to erase these because we don't need them, and then add some new ones, and now it's using the von Mises stress, max and min, and we'll tick that entity there. And so the drop down here is essentially representing any of the 4 components, scalar 1, 2, vector, and velocity. So it's possible that sometimes you might have multiple components being sketched, but if you have 2 of the same kind of type, so we've got 2 scalars being plotted on shells in this context, then if I turned on scalar 1, it would actually show us no data available for that, and that's because it cannot be displayed for both of them. You can only have one contouring. If, however, the first scalar was for something like beams or discretes or something like that, then it is possible to have 2 different data types being plotted at once. So I'll turn that one off again, and then simply click on capture, and then repeat this process in reporter. So we'll make that image blank, minimize it, and then in here we're going to go Control I, and we're going to add in the entity ID first, and then we need to add in the max von Mises stress. So that's here, and then I'm going to put in a 2F there. And here we're going to go for the minimum von Mises stress, go 2F there. So now we can see all of this data is being presented for us and formatted, and you can obviously extend this for your own post-processing of analyses. So I hope you found this top tip interesting and you've learned some things that you can apply when post-processing your own models. Thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next Oasys Top Tips.